Welcome to Public Health on Call, a podcast from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. I'm Joshua Sharfstein, Vice Dean for Public Health Practice and Community Engagement, and a former health commissioner here in Baltimore. Our goal is to bring evidence and experience to illuminate critical public health issues. If you have questions or ideas for us, please send an email to publichealthquestion@jhu.edu. That's publichealthquestion@jhu.edu for future podcast episodes.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Smith Rogers, producer of Public Health on Call. Today, how an expert looks around a city and assesses the likelihood of infrastructure failures. Dr. Marcus Hendricks, a faculty member and director of the Stormwater Infrastructure Resilience and Justice Lab at the University of Maryland, speaks to Dr. Josh Sharfstein about Flint, Michigan, and Jackson, Mississippi, and the evolving pattern that they represent. Let's listen.
Dr. Marcus Hendricks, thanks so much for joining me in Public Health on Call to talk about not just the situation in Jackson, Mississippi, but what we can learn from this situation about the more general challenges facing urban infrastructure.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me.
So when Flint happened, often people may have thought that there was a challenge in Flint, Michigan with the water. It was a Flint, Michigan issue. And now Jackson has happened, and people have said, well, there's a problem in Jackson, Mississippi with the water. It's a Jackson issue. You think about water systems across the country. How do you think about it?
Sure. Yeah, I think that we tend to focus on the headline story of the day, and we rationalize in our mind that in a modernized country like the United States, that, these circumstances of Flint, Michigan or Jackson, Mississippi are outliers, are novel in some type of way. But from my research and studies over the years, I've realized that these issues are pervasive. And there are cities, both big and small, across the nation that are suffering from infrastructure in disrepair. And not only is it a matter of drinking water infrastructure, it's the big four major systems from water to transportation and energy. And even within water itself, you have to consider both drinking water, wastewater, as well as stormwater. And, these systems tend to be more latent and underground and go unnoticed. And so really want to caution folks about relegating these particular case studies to some, outlier circumstances and recognize that these issues are all around us.
So we go into a city. What are the questions that you ask to get a sense of the state of the infrastructure?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I tell folks all the time is that if you really want to understand the quality and condition of broader neighborhood infrastructure, you can usually look to the quality and condition of the housing stock. And if you really want to understand the quality or condition of the housing stock, you can usually look to who lives there. I think from an environmental justice perspective, we've tended to focus on traditional environmental justice issues of, emissions and air quality and pollution. But there are environmental justice issues that are more latent when it comes to infrastructure or lack thereof in communities of color. And I think because of historical redlining and segregation that has impacted the types and quality of housing that communities of color often occupy is directly connected to broader community tax base, which is the fundamental financing mechanism for community infrastructure. And so if you don't have the assessed values of the housing in terms of the quality and the price, you also don't have the tax base. And you also likely don't have private sector investment. And all of those things are, connected and a function of segregation, discrimination that impacts the ability to invest in infrastructure.
So you don't even have to say, take me to the sewage treatment plant. You can drive around, look at the housing, look at who's living there, and have a pretty good guess that there are going to be some important infrastructure gaps.
Absolutely. From, the evidence that we've seen in terms of outcomes and impacts from both small scale and larger scale disasters and outcomes is pretty consistent in the science and literature in terms of who's suffering the most and who is most at risk of the greatest impacts. And that usually, again, tends to be communities of color. And again, you can see that physical continuation in terms of housing into infrastructure, but then you can also see the stark difference when you move outside of communities of color in terms of what other more affluent and white communities have compared to communities of color.
So I want to put some details on the challenges that we're talking about. So in Flint, we saw lead in the water. In Jackson, a community without water because of flooding of all the water facilities. What other consequences are you seeing more affecting communities of color in cities which have not invested in their infrastructure?
Sure. We're seeing distresses of all kinds, from corroded pipes, which was sort of the circumstances in Flint, to pumping stations that are in disrepair and didn't have the ability to pump water up into the water tower, which provides the pressure and gravitational pull to distribute water into households. But then if you think about, other water systems and wastewater or stormwater, these systems also have distresses in terms of linear cracking, collapses that impact communities in terms of sewer overflows or flooding because of the inability of these systems to manage and convey water in the ways that they were designed to. In fact, right around the same time that we learned about what was going on in Jackson, Mississippi, Baltimore, Maryland were having issues with their drinking water and wastewater infrastructure. And essentially what was going on is that there were distresses in both the drinking water and the wastewater systems, and water was being drawn in potentially from the wastewater system into the drinking water lines, and E. coli was found to be present in the drinking water. And so again, distress and damage can look anything from corroded pipes to cracking to collapses to just the entire system is failing and in disrepair.
So what is the scale of investment that's needed to fix this? I'm guessing we're talking about more than just a handful of cities here.
Sure.
Do you think that investments like the infrastructure bill are going to be helpful?
I think, this historic investment that's coming by way of the infrastructure bill is a step in the right direction. But I don't think it will be sufficient to tend to all of the systems that need investment and that have, gone uninvested in or underinvested in or disinvested altogether over the years. We're talking about cities all across the country that are suffering from what we've coined as this infrastructure crisis. And again, recently it's been water systems that have made headline news, but we're talking about multiple systems across multiple cities across the country. And some of the level of disrepair that we're seeing in one individual city can cost upwards of hundreds of millions of dollars. And so then when you tabulate that for every city in the nation that is in need of some type of infrastructure investment across multiple systems, this historic investment, albeit historic, is insufficient in terms of what we actually need. And so, again, I think it's a start and it's a great start, but there needs to be more planning in terms of longer term investments and not just initial investments, but ongoing investment for maintenance and rehabilitation.
First, there was Flint. Now there's Jackson. What will it take for people to see this as part of a true pattern, not just individual cases?
Yeah, I think much like any type of disaster or crisis, when the degrees of separation start to shrink, when people are directly affected or impacted, or they know of somebody that was directly impacted, it starts to gel for folks and become real for folks. Unfortunately, oftentimes that's what it takes for folks to really take these types of things serious. Because otherwise, again, we relegate it to, those are circumstances of Flint and Jackson and don't realize, no, it's actually happening in my own backyard.
The implication of that is we're probably going to see more of these, and the frequency of these problems is going to increase until this gets taken more seriously by states and by the federal government.
Sure. This is just the very beginning, not only for, infrastructure and the wear and tear on infrastructure in and of itself, but then when you think about the changing circumstances of climate change and more intense and frequent wet weather events and other types of climate-induced weather and climate patterns is only going to add additional pressure to these systems that are already in disrepair. Likewise, when you think about infrastructure, you have to think about it in a sense of a car, for example. Once you drive that vehicle off the showroom floor, it automatically starts to depreciate when you start to put it into use. And so, even when you have investment, it has to be ongoing, longer term investment, because with use goes the need for maintenance and repair. We can't look at this as sort of a one-off need for investment, but again, a longer term ongoing need for investment, especially in the context of climate.
It's a pretty dismal picture you're painting here, but I guess recognizing the challenge facing the country is necessary to begin to address it.
We've been here before and we've known the need for some time. It just so happened that this administration was the administration that was able to get the bill done. But I've been lamenting about this work and ringing the alarm on these types of issues for some time. In fact, my early dissertation work was titled The Infrastructures of Equity and Environmental Justice, and recognizing the need for investment and disinvestment in communities across the board, but particularly lower wealth and communities of color.
Well, in a sense, then, I hope that your work has its moment now, and that people can really pay attention to the underlying challenges and what they mean, not just for clean water, but for justice and equity as well. So thank you very, very much for joining us and talking to us today.
Thank you so much.
Public Health on Call is produced by Joshua Sharfstein, Lindsay Smith Rogers, and Stephanie Desmond. Audio production by J.B. Arbogast, Holly Cardinal, Spencer Greer, and Matthew Martin, with support from Chip Hickey. Distribution by Nick Moran. Production support from Catherine Ricardo. Social media run by Grace Holes Fernandez and Amber Bryan Singletary. Thank you for listening.